The Ember Protocol Part 1. Decades of Dust. The workshop smelled of metal shavings and old coffee, a scent that had soaked into the concrete walls over 3 decades. Dr. Cassandra Volk wiped her hands on a rag, already stained beyond redemption, and stepped back to examine the fuel chamber housing. Around her, the skeletal frame of the Resolute rose like the ribcage of some ancient beast, all exposed struts and honest welds. "You're doing it again," Julian said from the doorway, 2 mugs balanced in his weathered hands. His grey hair caught the afternoon light streaming through the garage's single window. "Doing what?" Cassandra didn't look up, running her fingers along a welded seam. "That thing where you check the same connection 17 times. He set 1 mug beside her toolbox. "It's perfect, Cass. It's been perfect for 6 months. She finally turned to him. This man who'd stood in this same garage through recessions and ridicule, through her father's funeral, and the foreclosure notice they'd fought off by selling Julian's beloved Cessna. Lines creased his face now, deep as the grooves in a well-used blueprint. But his eyes still held that spark from the day they'd met at the aerospace conference in Houston. Back when her hair was dark and his dreams of Mars were still possible. "Perfect isn't good enough," she said softly. "Not for what they'll say when this doesn't work." "When?" Julian raised an eyebrow. "Not if." Cassandra managed a tired smile. Figure of speech. Outside, the California sun beat down on their property, the same land they'd mortgaged twice to fund the project everyone called foolish. The academic journals had stopped returning her calls a decade ago. The last conference invitation had come with a subtle suggestion that perhaps she should consider retirement, pursue hobbies, spend time with grandchildren she didn't have. The Ember Protocol, they'd named it. This system of hers that combined old-school solid rocket boosters with a hybrid augmentation system nobody believed would work. While the rest of humanity reached for quantum drives and ion propulsion, Cassandra had gone backward, mining the forgotten efficiency of combustion chemistry and gravitational mathematics that required slide rules and patience. Remember that first blueprint? Julian settled onto his stool, the one with the cracked seat he refused to replace. "You drew it on a napkin at that terrible hotel bar." "The one in Denver." Cassandra picked up her mug, the warmth spreading through her calloused hands. "You told me I was crazy. I told you it was brilliant and crazy." "There's a difference," he grinned. "Then I told you I'd help you build it. You were supposed to be training for the Europa mission." "I was." His smile faded slightly. "But some things matter more than ice moons." The unspoken weight of that sacrifice hung between them, comfortable as an old blanket now, but heavy nonetheless. Julian had given up his seat on humanity's first mission to Jupiter's ocean moon to stay earthbound with her, to teach teenagers about physics in a cramped classroom while she chased what everyone called a ghost. Cassandra's phone shattered the moment, buzzing against the workbench with unusual insistence. She glanced at the screen and froze. "It's Owen Hartley," she breathed. Julian sat up straighter. "Mission Director Hartley, from Houston Control," she answered, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Dr. Volk speaking. Cassandra." Owen's voice crackled with barely controlled panic. "I need you to tell me the Resolute is flight ready." Her eyes met Julian's across the garage, questions flashing between them in the language of 3 decades. "It is," she said carefully. "But Owen, what's happened?" "The Celestial Dawn. Engine cascade failure near Jovian orbit. 12 passengers stranded, including Senator Whitmore's daughter and the Taiwanese ambassador. Life support critical in 72 hours. He paused, and she heard him take a shaking breath. "We've sent 4 rescue craft. 4, Cassandra. The Prometheus with its quantum pulse drive made it halfway before the system fried itself. The New Horizon didn't even clear Mars orbit before gravitational interference scrambled its navigation. We've lost contact with the Silver Arrow entirely." Cassandra's mind raced through trajectories and fuel calculations, numbers she'd run so many times in her sleep that they were practically muscle memory. "The interference patterns from Jupiter's magnetosphere," she said slowly. "Your advanced systems can't compensate." "Exactly," Owen's voice held desperate hope. "But your system, that absurdly simple, primitive, beautiful system of yours, Doesn't rely on delicate quantum states or ion stream regulation. Julian finished, having heard enough to understand. He was already moving toward the equipment lockers. How fast can you launch? Owen asked. Cassandra looked at the Resolute, at the ship built from their dreams and mortgage payments, from Julian's sacrifice and her stubborn refusal to accept that newer always meant better. She thought of the dinner parties where colleagues pitied them, the funding committees who'd laughed, the journal editor who'd called her work aggressively obsolete. 16 hours, she said. We'll need a crew. You're looking at them, Julian called out, already pulling flight suits from storage. Owen was quiet for 3 heartbeats. Cassandra, you're 58 years old. Julian hasn't piloted anything beyond a simulator in 20 years. I need you to understand what I'm asking. Cassandra walked to Julian, took his hand in hers. His fingers were warm, familiar, steady as the day he'd slipped a simple band on her finger in that cramped apartment they could barely afford. Owen, she said quietly, we've been ready for 30 years. We just needed everyone else to stop laughing long enough to notice. She ended the call and looked up at Julian. In his eyes, she saw the young astronaut who'd chosen her over the stars, and in hers, he saw the brilliant engineer who'd never stopped reaching for them. Time to fly? He asked. Time to fly, she confirmed. The Ember Protocol was no longer a joke. It was humanity's last hope, and in 16 hours, the galaxy would finally understand what Cassandra Volk had known all along. Sometimes the old ways aren't outdated. Sometimes they're just waiting for the right moment to prove everyone wrong. Outside, the California sun began its descent, painting the workshop in amber light. And in that golden hour, 2 people who'd spent 3 decades being dismissed began the countdown to vindication. The launch pad at Mojave Spaceport looked nothing like the gleaming facilities in Houston or Cape Canaveral. No chrome towers, no armies of technicians in crisp uniforms. Just weathered concrete, a single gantry elevator that creaked with every movement, and a handful of engineers who'd volunteered their weekend because they believed in something the world had forgotten. Cassandra sat in the pilot seat, running through pre-flight checks with the practiced rhythm of ritual. Beside her, Julian worked through navigation protocols, his fingers dancing across controls that were analog as much as digital. Through the viewport, Earth curved away in blues and whites, beautiful and indifferent. Fuel pressure nominal, she called out. Guidance systems locked, Julian replied. Trajectory calculations confirmed. Owen's voice crackled through the comm. Resolute Houston Control. We're showing green across the board. You're cleared for launch at your discretion. Cassandra's hand hovered over the ignition sequence, 30 years compressed into this single moment. She thought of the first time they'd kissed, pressed against this very ship's half-built frame in the garage. She thought of the eviction notice Julian had burned in their fireplace, telling her they'd make the next month's rent somehow. She thought of her mother's funeral, when her siblings had begged her to give up that foolish project and get a real job. You okay? Julian's voice, soft and private on their internal channel. Remembering. Good memories or bad? Both. She turned to look at him, this man whose face she knew better than her own reflection. All worth it. He reached across the narrow cockpit and squeezed her hand. Every single day. Cassandra triggered the ignition sequence. The Resolute didn't leap skyward with the violent thrust of modern rockets. It rose with a deep, throaty roar that felt almost alive, burning fuel that chemists had declared inefficient decades ago. But inefficient didn't mean weak. The acceleration pressed them into their seats with steady, reliable force. Altitude 5,000 meters, Julian read off. Velocity nominal. Trajectory perfect. Through the viewport, the sky darkened from blue to black. Stars appeared one by one, ancient light from fires that burned before humanity learned to reach beyond its cradle. As Earth fell away behind them, Cassandra allowed herself a moment to breathe. The first hurdle was cleared. Now came the hard part. 3 weeks in space, navigating a route that every computer model said was impossible for a ship like theirs. The first 2 days passed in the peculiar rhythm of long-duration spaceflight. They ate freeze-dried meals that Julian insisted on seasoning with the hot sauce he'd smuggled aboard. They slept in shifts, one always awake to monitor systems that didn't have the self-correcting algorithms of modern ships. They talked sometimes about the mission, more often about nothing important at all. On the third night, though night had no meaning here, Julian found Cassandra floating near the observation port. Staring at the infinite dark. "Can't sleep?" he asked, drifting up beside her. "Do you regret it?" The question came out smaller than she'd intended. "Europa, your career, everything you gave up for this." Julian was quiet for a long moment, just the gentle hum of life support filling the space. "You remember our wedding?" He finally said, "Of course. That apartment was so small. Your cousin couldn't fit in the kitchen during the reception. The cake melted because the AC was broken. And when Pastor Williams asked if I'd take you for better or worse..." He turned to face her, weightless but grounded by the intensity in his eyes. "I meant it, Cass. The worse wasn't what scared me. It was the idea of better without you in it. Europa would have been incredible. This is incredible." He gestured at the viewport, at Mars glowing red in the distance, at the ship they'd built with their own hands. "I'm flying through space with my wife, proving every smug academic wrong, saving lives they said couldn't be saved. That's better than any moon." Cassandra felt tears wanting to come, the kind that formed strange spheres in zero gravity. "I never thanked you properly." "For what?" "For believing in me when I stopped believing in myself. That year after the Princeton rejection, when I couldn't get out of bed for 3 months. Julian cupped her face gently. "You would have done the same for me. You did do the same for me when my flight certification was suspended after the accident." They floated there together, two people who'd weathered storms by standing as one. The alarm shattered the moment, proximity warning. They scrambled back to the cockpit. "What is it?" Cassandra strapped in, scanning readouts. "Debris field," Julian reported, fingers flying across navigation. "Metallic signatures. Large objects tumbling in chaotic patterns." Owen's voice tense. "Resolute, Houston. We're tracking it now. That's the Silver Arrow. She came apart 3 days ago. You're heading straight into the wreckage." Cassandra's mind raced. Modern ships could compute thousands of trajectories per second, finding safe passages through debris fields that looked impossible. The Resolute had her Julian and paper calculations. "We can navigate it," she said, more confident than she felt. "Cassandra, there are pieces the size of cars moving at 8 kilometers per second. One impact and..." "I know the math, Owen." She pulled out her tablet, the one covered in coffee stains and scribbled notes. "Julian, I need precise distances to the 4 largest fragments." He worked the sensors, calling out numbers. Cassandra scribbled, crossed out, recalculated. 30 years of refusing to trust computers meant her mental math was as sharp as any algorithm. "There." She pointed at a gap between tumbling metal shards. "If we burn now 68 seconds at 30% thrust, cut engines and coast, we thread through at the widest point." "Thread through?" Owen sounded horrified. "That gap is 40 meters wide. Your ship is 18 meters across, with less than 11 meters of clearance on each side." "Which is why," Julian said calmly, taking the controls, "I'm going to fly it manually. No computer would attempt this. Good thing I'm not a computer." "Julian..." "Owen, with respect, shut up and let us work." Julian's hands settled on the control sticks, physical interfaces that younger pilots called prehistoric. "Cass, on your count." She watched the fragments, calculating their spin, their velocity, the window that would open for exactly 12 seconds. 3, 2, 1, burn. The Resolute surged forward. Julian's hands made minute corrections, tiny adjustments the computer guidance would have smoothed out, but couldn't match for instinct. Cassandra called out distances, her voice steady even as her heart hammered. Fragment Alpha, 90 meters and closing. Beta at 120. Gamma approaching from portside, 60 meters. They plunged into the debris field. Metal flashed past the viewport, close enough to see the scoring from explosive decompression. A piece the size of a refrigerator tumbled past, missing them by meters. Another spun beneath them, its jagged edge glinting in the distant sunlight. "Cut thrust," Cassandra commanded. Julian killed the engines. They coasted, momentum carrying them through the deadly dance. A panel scraped along their hull with a shriek that made Cassandra's teeth ache, but held. Julian nudged them 2 degrees starboard, threading between fragments that would have shredded them. And then they were through. Clear. Julian breathed. Owen's voice came back, shaking with relief or anger, possibly both. That was the most reckless, brilliant, absolutely insane thing I've ever witnessed. Don't ever do it again. Cassandra and Julian looked at each other and burst out laughing, the kind of laughter that came from surviving the impossible. Owen, Cassandra said when she could speak again, we haven't even gotten to the hard part yet. Because ahead, growing larger in the viewport, Jupiter swirled with storms that had raged for centuries, its magnetosphere creating interference that had killed every advanced rescue ship sent before them. And somewhere in that chaos, 12 people waited, their oxygen running out, their hope fading. But the Resolute flew on, an obsolete ship piloted by 2 people whom the world had written off, carrying the only thing that mattered, a love that refused to quit, and a dream that refused to die. Jupiter filled the viewport like a god from ancient mythology, all swirling reds and browns, the great red spot staring at them like an eye that had witnessed the birth of worlds. Somewhere in the chaos of its orbital space, the celestial dawn tumbled, silent and dark. Life support estimated at 14 hours, Owen reported from Houston, his voice crackling through the interference. Cassandra, the magnetosphere readings are off the charts. Every sensor we have says your ship shouldn't be able to function in those conditions. Our sensors aren't that sophisticated, Cassandra replied, studying her hand-drawn charts. Can't be disrupted if there's nothing to disrupt. Julian worked the radio bands, searching through static. Come on, he muttered. Give me something. A burst of white noise resolved into a weak voice. Anyone receiving? This is Celestial Dawn, oxygen at critical levels. Please, Dawn, this is Resolute, Julian transmitted. We're 700 kilometers out and closing. Hold on, the reply came back, disbelieving. Resolute? The garage ship. You actually made it? Cassandra felt Julian tense beside her. 30 years of mockery condensed into those 3 words. The garage ship. She reached over and squeezed his knee. We're here, she said simply. Transmitting rendezvous coordinates now. But as they closed the distance, Cassandra's calculations kept hitting the same impossible wall. The Celestial Dawn was tumbling in a decaying orbit, caught between Jupiter's gravity and the orbital mechanics of its inner moons. Every rescue attempt had failed, because the advanced ships couldn't generate enough thrust in the interference-heavy environment to match the Dawn's chaotic trajectory. We need a gravity assist, Cassandra said suddenly. Owen's voice came back sharp. A what? Old technique. Pre-quantum drive era. We use Io's gravity to slingshot ourselves into an intercept course. She was already calculating, pencil flying across paper. The Dawn's tumble has a pattern. If we time it right, we can match their spin, dock, and use another burn to break both ships free. Cassandra, Owen said carefully. That maneuver requires precision down to milliseconds. Modern navigation computers struggle with it. You're talking about doing it by hand in an interference field that's scrambling our telemetry. Not by hand, Julian said quietly. He met Cassandra's eyes across the cockpit, and in that moment, she saw everything. The young pilot who'd given up the stars, the teacher who'd helped her calculate thrust ratios on their kitchen table, the man who'd held her when the world said she was wasting her life. By feel, by instinct, by knowing this ship the way we know each other. Cassandra nodded slowly. It's the only way. They began the approach to Io, the volcanic moon spitting plumes of sulfur into space. Cassandra called out numbers, velocity, angle, gravitational gradient. Julian flew, his hands steady on controls that responded without the microsecond delays of computer mediation. Remember that night in the garage? Julian said as they swept past Io's scarred surface. When we couldn't figure out the fuel injection sequence. We stayed up until dawn. Cassandra watched the numbers, waiting for the exact moment. You made terrible coffee. You said it was perfect because you were drinking it with me. I lied. It was awful, she smiled. But I meant the rest of it. 3, 2, 1, burn. The Resolute fired its engines, that beautiful, primitive roar of combustion that humanity had been using to reach for the heavens since before anyone dreamed of quantum states. They whipped around Io, gravity flinging them forward like a stone from a sling. The celestial dawn appeared ahead, tumbling end over end. Cassandra saw it clearly now, the luxury yacht that represented everything their ship wasn't. Sleek, expensive, built by committees of experts who dismissed people like her as relics, and it was helpless, waiting to die in the dark. Matching rotation, Julian announced. His hands moved in tiny increments, adjusting thrust vectors by feel. The Resolute began to spin, synchronizing with the dawn's tumble. This is like that dance at your sister's wedding, where you stepped on my feet 12 times. I only stepped on them twice. The other 10 you stepped on mine. He grinned, sweat beading on his forehead. But we finished the dance. They spiraled closer, two ships spinning in unison through Jupiter's hostile space. Cassandra watched the docking collar approach, calculating, adjusting, trusting Julian to translate her numbers into motion. Contact in 5 seconds, she said. 4, 3, 2. The ships connected with a clang that rang through the hull. Magnetic locks engaged. Julian killed their spin with a final burn, both ships stabilizing as one. We're docked, Cassandra breathed. Cheers erupted over the comm from Houston. Owen's voice broke with emotion. You magnificent, stubborn, brilliant fools. You actually did it. But they weren't finished. Cassandra was already calculating the escape burn, the thrust needed to break both ships free of Jupiter's pull and set course for home. The numbers weren't encouraging. Julian, she said quietly. Our fuel reserves. If we push hard enough to get everyone home, we won't have enough for a safe landing. He understood immediately. We'll have to go ballistic. Trust the heat shields. Heat shields we built in our garage. Heat shields, he corrected gently, that you designed and I installed, working together every night for 2 years. They'll hold. Through the airlock, the survivors began transferring. 12 people who'd left Earth on a luxury cruise, never imagining they'd be rescued by the ship everyone mocked. Senator Whitmore's daughter was crying. The Taiwanese ambassador clutched a photograph. A young couple held each other, exhausted and grateful. The last aboard was a child, maybe 8 years old, who stopped to look at Cassandra and Julian in their worn flight suits, in their cramped cockpit covered with handwritten notes and coffee stains. Thank you, the girl whispered. Cassandra knelt down, ignoring the protocols. You're welcome, sweetheart. My dad says your ship is really old, Julian laughed. It is. But sometimes old things work better than new ones. Sometimes they just need someone to believe in them. With all souls aboard, Cassandra initiated the escape burn. The Resolute groaned, pushing beyond its designed limits, but it held. They broke free of Jupiter's grip, the gas giant falling away behind them. The journey home took 18 days. The survivors filled every available space, turning their 2-person ship into a crowded refuge. But somehow it worked. People shared stories, rationed food, took turns at observation posts watching the stars. On the 10th day, Cassandra found Julian floating near the engine compartment, running his hand along a welded seam. Thinking about something? She asked. That conference in Houston, 32 years ago. He smiled at the memory. You were presenting your thesis on hybrid propulsion. Everyone in that room thought you were wasting your time. Everyone but you. I saw someone who looked at the stars the way I did. Like they were a promise, not just a destination. He took her hand. I knew right then I'd follow you anywhere. Even into a garage in California to build a ship no one believed in. Especially there. They floated together in comfortable silence, the ship they'd built humming around them, carrying 13 souls home through the infinite dark. Earth orbit came on day 19. The re-entry was exactly as brutal as Cassandra had calculated. Heat shields glowing white-hot, the hull screaming as it tore through atmosphere. But those garage-built shields held every rivet and weld, proving that love and patience could build things that lasted. They splashed down in the Pacific at dawn, recovery ships already converging. As helicopters circled and cameras broadcast to billions, Cassandra and Julian sat in their cockpit one last time, waiting for the hatch to open, for the world to flood in. "They're going to want speeches," Julian said. "Interviews, awards, probably a museum tour. You know what I want?" He looked at her, this woman he'd chosen over Europa, over everything. "I want to go home to our garage and start building something new." Cassandra laughed, tears streaming down her face. "What would we build?" "I don't know. Something everyone says is impossible." He kissed her forehead. "We're good at those." The hatch opened. Sunlight poured in, warm and golden. Outside, they could hear cheering, questions shouted over the waves, the machinery of fame warming up. But before they stepped out into vindication, Cassandra held Julian back for one more moment. "Thank you," she said, "for believing." "Thank you," he replied, "for being worth believing in." They emerged together, two people who'd spent 3 decades being dismissed, now standing as proof that the world's laughter didn't define what was possible. The cameras flashed, capturing the moment for history, but the real moment had happened years ago, in a small garage where a woman drew designs everyone called obsolete, and a man who could have touched the moons of Jupiter chose instead to help her reach for something more important. A dream they could share. 5 years later, the Resolute sat in the Smithsonian, preserved behind glass. School children pressed their faces to the barriers, marveling at the primitive controls. The handwritten calculations still taped to bulkheads. But in a garage in California, Cassandra and Julian worked on something new. Their hair was whiter now, their hands shakier, but their eyes held the same fire. On the wall, alongside faded blueprints and 30-year-old photographs, hung a new sketch. Another impossible ship, another dream everyone would say couldn't work. Julian brought 2 mugs of coffee, still terrible, and sat beside his wife. "Ready to prove them wrong again?" he asked. Cassandra took his hand, feeling the calluses that matched her own. "Evidence of a lifetime building dreams together. Always," she said. And somewhere above them, satellites traced orbits around a world that had learned an old truth. Sometimes the most advanced technology in the universe is 2 people who refuse to stop believing in each other. The Resolute had flown once, saved lives, and changed everything. But its real legacy wasn't in the stars, it was in the garage where it was born, where love and stubbornness still built impossible things, one perfect weld at a time.